Now we're going to talk about what virtue means and how virtues kind of quarrel with history. Virtue, as I think I've told you before, has a very simple meaning in the 18th century. It means the willingness to deny self-interest in order to promote the public good. And the denial of self-interest may be even the willingness to sacrifice one's life. That's the ultimate patriotic act. So virtue has a very carefully defined meaning, but it has many manifestations. It's virtuous to study hard. It's virtuous to serve on a public committee. It's virtuous to defend your country in war. It's virtuous to speak up against oppression. It's virtuous to participate in making the society better in any way that you do so. So virtue is something Americans are very concerned with, because virtue is understood as the thing which is going to preserve a republic. In fact, it's the only thing that's going to preserve a republic. Republic has stripped away all the traditional sources of social stability. There's no aristocracy, making sure the land is, kept up in a certain way and that order prevails around a certain region. There's no king anymore with his army and his government to come and force you to do things. There's no there's no church to keep everybody in line morally. There is certainly no single church. There aren't any kind of ancient medieval institutions that everyone's gotten used to over the centuries. So virtue's it when it comes to stability in a republic. And that's why it's a quarrel with history. The way people in the 18th century understand history, the way many people understand history today, is that it's kind of a cycle. It goes up and down, that empires rise and fall, that corruption becomes inevitable, that sooner or later there's going to be a crash, and then something good will build up again from that. Well, virtue is an attempt to stop that cycle from occurring. It's an attempt to keep people at their best always, so the society doesn't become degenerate and fail. So the inculcation of virtue, the reinforcement of virtue, the fertilization of virtue are the key tasks in a republic, particularly when it comes to young people. It's very important to educate young people to be good Republican citizens, and that's what much of the concern in post-revolutionary America is about. So now let's look at virtue and what it means. This is a French painting, but this is something that refers to the classical stories, and they're always looking back at the Romans and to some extent the Greeks, but primarily the Romans for examples of virtue, because the Romans did have a republic, and the republic was very successful and it lasted for hundreds of years. So here's a story from the Romans, the Oath of the Horatii. Horatii is plural of Horatio, which is a name. And these guys on the left here are emulating Horatio. They're vowing to defend their homeland. Horatio was a great hero who defended a bridge against an invading army all by himself. So they're vowing to lay down their lives for the defense of the fatherland, very bravely doing so, and the older guy is going to give them their swords once the vows are finished. And then the women on the right there are all sad and crying because they know that these young men are likely to die. So this is a painting about the personification of virtue, the ultimate virtue of dying for the defense of others. This kind of things, this is French as I said, but we see this sort of thing in America a lot in the years following the American Revolution. So here's an American example. There's America personified as a woman trampling on oppression. And we see American virtue there. And we've got our friends Benjamin Franklin and George Washington as the two great American statesmen, and so forth and so on. There's a close-up of them. Franklin in his simple cap still, and Washington in his uniform. All right, other ways in which these lessons from history are expressed, one of the primary ways in which it's expressed is through architecture. And what happens in architecture is there's an attempt to emulate or to signify the commitment to ancient virtues by copying ancient elements of architecture. So here's Noah Webster's house, which I wanted to show you earlier. Forgot that it was in this point in the slideshow. And Webster has these Ionic columns in his porch, and you also see the dental molding around. This is very characteristic of federal architecture, which is the architecture of America in the years following the Revolution. And there's always this sort of attempt to look back, these little subtle reminders of Rome and the Roman Republic. This kind of neoclassical architecture was popular in England as well, so we don't want to make too much of a big deal out of it. However, in this case, the Bank of Pennsylvania by Benjamin Latrobe, the institution of a bank, which is supposed to be, a very important public institution, public trust, and is supposed to be stable and strong and symbolize all that in the building, we see a direct allusion to Rome here, in a specific Roman building, in fact, the Roman Pantheon. That's what the Pantheon looked like. Pantheon was the temple of all the gods. And it still exists. That's what it looks like today. And here is a front viewing, and the reason I'm showing you this front view is because I want to show you this next. This is the rotunda of the University of Virginia, designed by Thomas Jefferson when he built the University of Virginia. And Jefferson's plan for UVA was to build an institution that would inculcate virtuous Republican leaders. So it's no accident that he has an almost exact copy of the Pantheon as what was planned for as the library of the university. All right, and then one more example of this attempt to inculcate republicanism in all sorts of different ways, and that's Charles Willson Peale's American Museum. Now, Peale was a revolutionary soldier in the war. He's a very patriotic American, and he, after the war, is a businessman as well as a painter. He had a very large family. He was very concerned with feeding them, obviously, and he trained many of his children, maybe all of his children, I'm not sure, to be painters, and a couple of his sons were very prominent painters as well. And at one point, around 1800 or so, Peale decides to make a few bucks by painting a series of portraits of famous Americans. And you can see in the top left of the slide that he's got George Washington there right in the front. So he has all these portraits of Americans, and he sets them up in a gallery and wants to charge people admission. He doesn't get enough people to come. He's not making enough money. So in addition to that, Peale has the portrait still, but he also has a museum. And his museum isn't just a collection of interesting stuff. It's a collection of interesting American stuff, American animals. We see a turkey here right in the lower left. This is a painting of the artist, Peale, who's also the entrepreneur, unveiling his museum for the public. And you can see behind him is the skeleton of a mastodon, which he discovered in Pennsylvania and dug up and had reconstructed as one of the elements of his American museum. So just as Webster is concerned with American language, Peale is concerned with American artifacts. We're going to learn about our great country, its wonderful nature, as well as its leading statesmen by coming to Peale's Museum. And here is another illustration of it. Maybe it opens in 1822. I'm not sure. I should find out what year it opens. There are the portraits up on the, you can see them running along the gallery on the top left. We've got statues of famous people. We have all the different animals, and we don't see the mastodon in this image.